Do you have a group of quail that have been living together for a long time and then all of a sudden they just started bullying each other? That's what we're going to discuss in today's video, what you can do about it and why it's happening. Hey guys, welcome back to another Slightly Rednecked video. Again, my name's Chris, and if you're not familiar with this channel, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, deck, or garage, or even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it. And today we're talking about why your quail are just beating themselves up all of a sudden. Now, I've addressed this in video many times. It's a pretty common occurrence that quail do fight with each other. When you put new birds in with existing birds, there's almost always fighting that's going to happen right there. But what I'm talking about today is why you have a group of birds that have been living together for a very long time, and then all of a sudden they start to beat each other up. So that can be a little bit of a surprise because they've been getting along just fine, and then all of a sudden you've got a bird that's all beat up for no reason whatsoever. The biggest reason, or the biggest cause for that, I should say, is the time of year. Right now is March 21st. It's spring. The days are getting longer, and with that, the birds are starting to go into breeding season. So the females are starting to lay eggs, the roosters are starting to crow. That means they've got a surge of hormones going into them right then. And when that happens, there's almost always a little bit of bickering, a little bit of territorial displays, a little bit of fighting that goes on. Usually it's not too serious, so don't panic about it. With the two hutches I've got here, these are birds that have been living together, have been in a group for a very long time. These guys here for a couple of years. The next hutch over, which we'll go over to here in a second, those guys have been living together since they were raised up, since they hatched. And they're a little over a year and a half old. So I did have a little bit of problems a couple of weeks ago. Started hearing the roosters crowing, and sure enough, a couple of days later, birds started getting beat up. Now, part of that's probably the hens beating up the roosters because they're a little bit, they're advancing on the hens a little bit. They're putting a little bit of breeding pressure on them, and the hens are getting a little bit territorial, a little standoffish, so they fight, they beat up the roosters a little bit. Most commonly, it does seem to be the hens that tend to be the most aggressive of the bunch, but not always. Sometimes it's your roosters picking on each other to establish dominance and to establish territory. So, what do you do about this when it happens? It kind of depends on how bad the situation really is. In this hutch here, I haven't had any problems that I've noticed. I'm sure they've picked on each other a little bit from time to time. I've got a few hens with feathers missing on the back of their heads, but that's just breeding behavior. That's all that is. That's not fighting, that's not dominance. The rest of the birds, they all seem fine. I haven't noticed any injuries. In the other hutch over here, I've had two birds that got beat up pretty bad. I actually lost one bird. He got beat up really bad and ended up passing away. And that's unfortunate. If I could have caught it early enough, here's the thing. Usually by the time it gets to that point, I mean, you don't even notice it before it gets to that point. And when it gets to that point, it's already too late. There's not much you can do. Now had I caught it early enough, I could have moved him out to another cage and tried to nurse him back to health, and probably could have. But then the problem comes when I put him back in there with them. He's going to be a strange bird to them, and they're going to probably beat him up again. But they may or may not. The other birds in here, I did have, like I said, a couple of birds that showed some signs of being beat up by the other birds, and I just left them in there. It wasn't that bad. They had feathers picked around their head, a little bit around their face, but their eyes weren't pecked out. They weren't bleeding that bad, just a little bit. And by leaving them in there, they healed up just fine. They were put in their place, apparently. There's no more problems. That's it. They've stopped fighting. No more issues. It's just kind of one of those things you have to go through when you first go into breeding season, that you are going to get your birds they're just going to get a little bit more aggressive at that time. But usually they get over it within a week or two. It doesn't last very long. It's usually a pretty quick process. Let me take you over here and I'll show you the one bird that I've got that's still showing some signs, still working on healing up, and we'll get him out and take a look at him. Here we go. Oh, there he went, right out the other door. I got to get him from one side to the other so I can catch him. There we go. I got him. Oh, don't fly away. Don't fly away. All right, this is a young rooster here. Well, not a young rooster, but this is a rooster here that I had that did get beat up pretty bad. And you can see on the back of his head, maybe that's showing up, maybe it's not. He's got some scars there where they pretty much picked his head round the side of his face, but this is a rooster, so that's not breeding behavior. That is being bullied and being picked on right there. Now, this stuff is healing up just fine. The birds are not continuing to pick on him. You can see some breeding going on in the background there maybe. I don't know if you guys can see that. Let me step out of the way. So this is probably another rooster picking on him, trying to establish dominance over him so that he gets breeding rights. But it could have been a hen picking on him too. And he had feathers missing all the way down the side of his face. Most of those have grown back already. He's still got a scab on the back of his head, but it's healing up just fine. Let me put him back in there. So when that kind of bullying starts up in the early spring, it's just an expected thing. And what I do is I usually just watch the birds pretty close, and as long as they don't have any really bad injuries, and by what I mean by really bad injuries is, you know, if they're pecking their eyes out or something like that, I'll go ahead and pull them out, or try to find the one that's the most aggressive bird, the one that's actually doing the picking, remove that one from the flock, because that could be a sign of more than just territorial, more than just dominance. It's a sign of a bird that just has overly aggressive features to it, and especially if it's happening in the off season, in the wintertime, when the birds are not laying eggs, when the roosters are not crowing. That's a different thing altogether. I've got videos that address that. I'll leave a link up here. I think it's on that side. You can go watch that video if that's your problem. But if you're just coming into the breeding season, just early spring where the days are getting longer and all of a sudden your rooster started crowing again, your hens are starting to lay eggs again, and there's a little bit of fighting that goes on, perfectly normal. It's usually nothing to worry about. And my advice would be to not do anything at all about it, really, unless it's really bad. And there's a fine line there. It's kind of hard to tell. I did lose one bird, so you know, you can take that for what it's worth. You could try to remove the birds when they get injured, if they're getting picked on, and remove them and put them in another cage, let them heal up. But when you put them back in, it's probably going to be just as bad. The birds are going to pick on that bird again because it's a new bird to the flock. And usually it works out better just to leave them in there, let them work out their differences. Even if one does get beat up, like you said, he had scars on the back of his head where they really beat him up pretty bad. But ever since then, no problems whatsoever. There's no more fighting going on. I mean, they get over it pretty quick. So that's my general advice for that, is when you first start seeing that, don't panic about it. Let the birds work it out. Try to keep an eye on them. Make sure it doesn't get too bad where you're not having birds getting killed. And they'll get over it within a week or two. That's a little bit different, again, like I said, than when you're getting fighting because you're putting birds together. New birds in with older birds, any of those, any of those kinds of things like that. That's a different situation. Go check that video I linked up there. But if it is just breeding season starting up and you're seeing some bullying, they're probably going to get over it within the next week or two. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this helps you out a little bit. And as always, God bless.